Hello, lovely people, and welcome back to yet another video. And today we'll be talking about how to trade with fundamentals. Okay, so this is my opinion on how to trade with fundamentals and how I actually do it. Okay, so you first have to know the pair you are trading. You have to understand the pair before you look into the news. But first, the only source of news I know is Forex Factory, which I have on my right here. Okay, so now let's talk about the pairs. Euro USD is my major pair, is the pair I trade. So I'd like to talk about Euro USD first. So Euro USD is the exchange rate between the euro and the US dollar. Euro is the base currency and USD is the quote currency. The base currency is the currency being bought or sold. And the quote currency is the currency used to measure the value of the base currency. In other words, it tells you how many US dollars are needed to buy 1 euro. So, how we look at Euro USD is the same way we'll be looking at XAU USD. So, XAU is the base currency and USD is the quote currency. BTC is the base currency and USD is the quote currency. When we look at CAD JPY, CAD is the base currency and JPY is the quote currency. When we look at CAD CHF, CAD is the base currency and CHF is the quote currency. Okay, so now, for example, if Euro USD is at 1.1700, this means that 1 euro is equal to 1.1700 US dollars. It's self-explanatory. And when we have XAU USD at 4.155, that means that 1 XAU is 4.155 US dollars. So Bitcoin is the one that will give you the most understanding. So right now, if BTC USD is at 63,000, that means 1 BTC is 63,000 US dollars. So now, I guess now you've captured it very well. So if BTC, when you look at the charts and if you see BTC at 73,000, that actually means that when you are selling 1 BTC, you are going to get how much? 73,000 US dollars. So that's the simple understanding of the pairs. Okay, so the first currency is the base currency, and the second currency is the quote currency. All right, so now let's look at the news. But let's first know how price moves, or let's get an understanding of how price moves. So with Euro USD will rise when the euro is stronger than the US dollar. And it will also fall when the US dollar is stronger than the euro. Okay. And how does the news also impact Euro USD? Okay. Positive news on the euro can strengthen the euro. Okay. So when we have a positive news, we can have a high probability that the Euro USD, which is the base currency, if the news is positive on the euro, then euro is going to be bullish, okay, or euro is going to rise, okay. So, and also negative news on the euro can weaken the euro, all right, which will also bring about a bearish movement. Okay, it's not with certainty, it's just an expectancy. Okay, everything about the market is not certain. Okay, we can sometimes have a positive news on euro, but still you not see any movement on the euro. Okay, on the Euro USD. So That's why the news is categorized into three parts or three sections, okay? Which is the low impact news, the medium impact news, and the high impact news. I'm sorry, it's currently raining, so if you don't hear me clearly, kindly forgive me. Okay, so and also positive news on the US dollar can strengthen the US dollar, increasing the probability of what? Of bearish movement. So in simple terms, if we have positive news on USD, euro has a higher probability of selling. Okay, if you have a negative news on USD, euro USD has a higher probability of buying. So that's how it works. Okay, so whenever the euro is positive, we can anticipate bullish movements. Whenever the USD is positive, we can anticipate bearish movement. Okay, so as a scalper, the fundamentals help me understand which currency is likely to be stronger and the probable direction of the market. That's why I don't actually trade with fundamentals. Okay, I don't trade only fundamentals. I trade fundamentals in confluence with my technicals. Okay, so first, if let's say there's a news at 6 p.m. and I have a setup which says my technical is telling me to go bearish on USD, then I'll wait. If that entry is within that 6 p.m. time frame, I'll wait for the news to be released. If that news is positive for USD, that means I have to hold my sell bias for Euro USD. Why? Because USD is now positive. And whenever USD is positive, we have to expect what? There's a high probability of a bullish, sorry. When USD is positive, there's a high probability of a bearish movement. So yes, sorry. So yes, that sell bias is then confirmed, okay? But this is how I was supposed to put it. But if the news at 6 p.m. was supposed to be or is becomes let me go again. Sorry guys. If the news at 6 p.m. ends up being negative on the euro, ends up being positive on the euro, then that means my sell bias has to hold. Okay, I have to hold on my sell bias and wait for the news to give its volume, depending on it being a high impact, medium impact, or low impact. Okay, we actually know the high impact news to carry more volume than the medium impact news, and also the medium impact news to carry more volume than the low impact news. All right, so the news should be in confluence with your technicals. You don't just trade because you see a news at 6 p.m. So you just enter sell or buy when it's 6 p.m. No, that's not it. Because you don't actually know what the news is saying. And even if the news prints out to be bullish and you are taking buys, you have to have a setup that confirms or that aligns with the news. Okay, so let me not talk much. Let's understand how you read the news. So when you come to Forex Factory is the only source I know. When you come to Forex Factory, you can see a lot of things, but the only thing that matters here is the actual, the forecast, and the previous. Okay, so maybe let's say I'm to trade at 2 p.m. and there's a news at 2 p.m. and I click on, sorry guys. When you come to the news, you click on the folder, and the very important section you want to look at is the usual effect. Okay, So looking at this usual effect, you can see it's written actual less than forecast is good for currency. The news is for the US dollar. Okay, so if it's saying that if the actual is less than forecast is good for currency, and the news ends up giving the same thing, the actual figure being greater than the forecast, then that means USD is doing good. Okay, so if at that very moment you are about to trade a bullish setup on the Euro USD, depending on the impact of the news, you would have to hold and wait. Okay, that's literally what I'm trying to say. So let's come to this is actually Wednesday, June 17th, and this is it right here. So let me give you an example of the trade I took on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, my technicals was telling me that market is bearish. Okay. And yes, there was news at 2 p.m. I trade from 1 to 3 p.m. Okay. So now at 2 p.m., when I came here, I saw these two low impact news. Okay. And this one told me that if the actual ends up being less than the forecast, that means the US dollar is doing good. Okay. And that didn't happen. Okay. And also, the second one told me if the actual is greater than the forecast, that means the the US dollar is doing good, and happened that same way. So that means that at that very moment, my sell bias is in confluence with the news, because here, even though it's a low impact news, here USD is now what's good. It's now doing good. So if USD is now doing good, we have a high probability of what's expecting a bearish move. And I also had a bearish setup. So that's how I trade the news. So it's in confluence with it. But if this actual figure was to be less than the forecast, I would have waited for, let's say, 2 p.m. or 5 p.m. Okay. But if my entry was before the 2 p.m., I would have waited on adding another position. You understand what I'm saying? Because you don't know the volume that news is going to bring. Okay. Even though it's a low impact news, you still don't know the volume it's going to bring. So if your technicals is bullish and the fundamentals is bearish, you have to trade carefully. Okay. Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to say. This video is actually getting long because I'm trying to explain it very well for you all to understand it. I'm doing my best. All right. Okay. So the fundamentals determine the probable direction. Okay. So in simple terms, it actually gives volume or adds volume to a direction. Okay. When the news is good for a currency, it will give volume to the direction of the news. I don't know if I'm clear with that. If just like this one that we had a bearish setup and the news was also in confluence with the setup, if it was to be a high impact news, that means that you would have had a probable with high momentum for this sell bias. Okay, let's look at 6 p.m. See that this sell bias was still active. Okay, was still active. If this trade was to be held till 6 p.m., this was the volume I would have given. Okay, because the news ended up also being in confluence with the bias. But if I was to hold this trade right here and wait for the news to be released, and the news was not in confluence with the bias, then I would have to either break even or just sacrifice that trade. Okay. So that's how I understand trading with fundamentals. And also how to read it is how I've said it. All right. It's nothing difficult. You just go to Forex Factory. Maybe you have to trade 2 p.m. or maybe you have to trade 6 p.m. You look at the news there, either it's being high impact, low impact, it still matters. That's how I've come to understand the news. Either low, medium, or high, it still matters. So you do your possible best to either be in confluence with it or stay away from it. All right. Yes. Okay. The last thing I'll add is whenever you're about to take a trade, make sure, and if there is a news, make sure you're in confluence with the news. Okay. Or make sure you stay away from the news. If not in confluence, make sure you stay away from the news. Okay. And if you took your entry before the news is released, make sure you manage your trades well for that day. Okay. If your entry wasn't or isn't in confluence with the trade while you are in the trade, you can either break even or just risk that trade. All right. But if it ends up being in confluence with the trade, you know what to do. You can increase your take profit levels, or based on how you take profits, you can take profit at another level. Okay. So that is it for this video. I hope you took something from this video or you were able to understand what I'm trying to say. Though I might not sound perfect or I might not give the perfect explanation, but you can also research on it and learn more about it. I'm just trying my best to explain it to the possible best. So yeah, thank you for watching my video once again, and I'll be very happy if you like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you once again, and peace out.